Today, I want to start off by talking about Nick Fuentes and cancel culture. And I've been thinking about this a little bit since the death of Charlie Kirk. And to me, it almost seems like I don't know how you would exactly quantify this, but I feel like Charlie Kirk was kind of holding back the floodgates on some things. And you can kind of see the reaction after Charlie Kirk's death. You have these people like Milo Yiannopoulos, however you pronounce his last name, and he comes out of retirement and starts going back on tour, whatever you want to call it, and and then you also see a surge in popularity for Nick Fuentes, and so once Charlie Kirk is removed from the political atmosphere, you kind of see this gravitation towards more extreme views, and it really just goes to show how much of an impact Charlie Kirk had on the political atmosphere, everything that he did. It was like Charlie Kirk was keeping people, maybe specifically young men, you could say, but it's almost as like he was keeping everybody away from those things. And so there's just a massive hole when somebody like that is removed. There's just a massive hole that needs to be filled. And unfortunately, sometimes it is not filled by the best people. And after Charlie Kirk's death, you kind of saw this ascension of popularity for Nick Fuentes, which ended up making him the number one podcast on Spotify, from which he's been banned. He's been banned from Spotify at this point. This was from what I've read a few months ago. And between then and now, we've kind of seen him go on his own little, I wouldn't say revenge tour, but he's gone around on various different podcasts and talk about a lot of different issues. I know he's in the past, he's talked with Candace Owens. His interview with Tucker Carlson received a lot of attention and scrutiny. And I wanted to talk about Nick Fuentes in the context of cancel culture. And we can sit here and have debates on how far does the First Amendment extend? To what extent should we extend it to social media and different platforms? What are the rights of the platforms in terms of censoring content? Should the First Amendment, as it was written in the Constitution, is that the original idea of First Amendment rights, should that be extended exactly the same? What it was meant to be in the beginning, should that be extended exactly the same on social media? And so we can sit here and have all of those debates and argue whether or not Nick Fuentes actually should have been banned from these various different platforms. But it's not necessarily that I have a huge problem with cancel culture in the sense of if you have a specific movement, then if you want to try and cut off the head of the snake, if you just want to try and ban Nick Fuentes, I think that's one thing. And again, we can talk about that. We can debate that. But my real problem is that not only do you have to ban Nick Fuentes, the problem is that you also have to ban every single other person and cancel, not necessarily that Tucker Carlson has been banned, but you have to cancel every single other person that has ever had any kind of interaction with Nick Fuentes ever. And to me, that is kind of problematic. If you want to have a society and a culture that's built upon ideas and the expression of those ideas, and then getting together and sitting down and talking about those ideas, then I think there has to be some bandwidth to have difficult conversations with questionable people. You can't just ban every single person that has ever had a discussion or cancel every single person that's ever had a discussion with Nick Fuentes, because what you end up with is a spider web of cancellation to the point where now nobody gets to have a conversation with anybody about anything because it's too offensive. And we're just going to keep on expanding the level of cancellation and to the point where nobody can talk about anything. And as a principle, that has to be problematic. I mean, if we want things to continue the way that they've continued, and if we want to be able to share ideas, that principle of cancellation is problematic in the long run. And the you see Nick Fuentes go on these podcasts with somebody like Candace Owens or somebody like Tucker Carlson, and the criticism is twofold. The first part of the criticism is that they have him on the show in the first place, and this is what I have a problem with. They have him on the show and they get criticized. Well, you can't give that guy a platform. Why would you let that guy speak? Why would you expose your followers and your listeners and the rest of us to his ideas? And why would you give him a platform in that way? I think that criticizing Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, whom I'm not personally a fan of either of them, but I think criticizing them for simply being willing to have a conversation, I think is flawed in principle. Again, if we're going to try to sustain this idea that we can sit together and talk about difficult things with difficult people, then and that's kind of just the way that our society has functioned for a long time. It's been built upon ideas, it's been built upon conversation, it's been built upon debate and the free expression of those opinions and debates. Then you shouldn't just simply criticize them for being willing to have a conversation with somebody like Nick Fuentes. The second part of the criticism that they have received for having Nick Fuentes on the show is that they do not push back enough against his ideas. And they kind of are just there, and you realize that, oh, maybe they're a lot more aligned with him than you initially thought. I don't have a problem with that. If you if you want to criticize somebody like Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson for not being aggressive enough towards Nick Fuentes, why they don't push him enough, why don't they actually try and push back on his viewpoints and debate him and actually try to call him out on some of the stuff that he's wrong on? If you want to criticize them for being too light-handed in those circumstances and aligning themselves too much with his ideas, I'm fine with that. I don't have any problem with that. But criticizing them for simply being willing to have a conversation, I think is a flawed way of looking at things. Because again, how far are you really willing to expand the cancellation? If we're going to share ideas freely, if we're going to share opinions freely, and we're going to have debate, there obviously comes a point in time where the cancellation has to be removed in order for those ideas to be able to be freely expressed. Now, to me, what I always thought, my interpretation of journalism, and I understand that Candace Owens is not, or Tucker Carlson might not be journalists in the traditional sense, but these are people that are part of the media. Tucker Carlson, he was on Fox News. He was part of the mainstream media. They have their own podcast, they have their own platform, they have their own following, they've written books, all these different things. I always thought that journalism was you as a person, as a journalist, you're willing to go where nobody else wants to go and talk to people that nobody else wants to talk to about things nobody else wants to talk about. And it's not that they don't want to talk about those things because they're uninteresting. It's just because it's you really have to branch out intellectually. Or maybe like journalists, you find them, they go to these war zones to figure out what's really going on to get a different point of view. That can be dangerous, can be physically dangerous, but also it's like intellectually intimidating. And so the to me, the best parts of journalism, the best part is that people are willing to see how far people are willing to go to get a different angle, to see how far people are willing to go in order to get a different point of view. And so that's what I always thought journalism was. You go places nobody else wants to go, you talk to people about things that nobody else is comfortable talking about. And when I see somebody like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens try and do that, right? They pull these people on that have been basically banned or exiled from the media space. I don't think you should necessarily criticize them for being willing to do that. Now, again, if you want to criticize the way that they handle it and criticize the fact that they just seem to more so be celebrating Nick Fuentes as opposed to combating him, then that's fine. But I'm saying the conversation piece of it has to remain intact in order for the war of ideas to function properly. And I think what people need to realize when you're talking about dealing with Nick Fuentes and dealing with his following and dealing with his ideas is that there is a threshold of popularity that once it is crossed, you are not going to get rid of that idea or that individual or that following just by silencing them, because you have to understand the way that they are operating. Nick Fuentes and his followers, they operate under the idea that we are correct about everything. We are right about everything. That is why they are banning us. That is why they are silencing us. And the more they silence us, that means the more right we are. And they have a it's us versus the world mentality. And the more you try and strip them of a platform, the more you try and strip them of a voice, the more they think that they are correct. The more they think that the world is against them and they are the true heroes and they are the ones fighting, fighting the power and all of these different things. And so I think Nick Fuentes crossed that threshold a while ago. I think at this point we're at the point of no return. And so silencing him and banning him is not going to get rid of him. It's not going to get rid of his ideas. It's not going to get rid of his following. And when it comes to also, I forgot I was going to add this. When you have a society and then you have people within that society who are losing faith in our major institutions. We're losing faith in our in the mainstream media. We're losing faith in our universities and education system, and we're losing faith in our government. And then all three of those sectors unite together and say, this guy is bad. This guy is horrible. Therefore, he must be silenced and avoided at all costs. So you have social media, the government, and you have universities and education all saying that Nick Fuentes is bad. He's wrong about everything. If we live in a society that distrusts all those institutions, you're not going to scare them away. Now they're curious. Well, if all three of these institutions, if all of these people and all of these mainstream sources are saying that he is wrong, then he must be right about something. And so then they go out of their way to search out Nick Fuentes and his ideas. Then they go out of their way to see what kind of points he's making and if he is actually correct. And then they just get pulled into all the nonsense, right? And so by silencing him at some point, it actually kind of fuels the fire. And the way that you deal with this, in my opinion, and my point of view on this is a little bit more scorched earth. I don't think silencing him and banning him from all these platforms is going to solve the problem. I think what needs to happen is you need to get all of the best conservative and liberal political minds out there together and publicly debate him on the biggest stage possible. Not all at once, not, 10 versus 1 debate, but they they need to, in order for Nick Fuentes to go away, he has to be thoroughly dismantled intellectually. His ideas need to be have to be ripped to shreds in the most public way possible. And only then, only after he and his following have been thoroughly embarrassed for everybody to see, that's when I think we'll actually see some of it taper off. Then I think that will actually silence them in a way that just simply banning them would not. And so I think that it's not we're going to run away from this. We're actually just going to confront this and we're going to throw everything that we have at him and see what happens. Now, I know that's not really fair because it's a check. That's just my opinion. I do think it's true, but that's a check that I can't personally cash. I don't have the political talent or gravity to set something like that up myself. But I do think it's true. I do think that's what needs to happen. This kind of passive, no shadow banning, no getting rid of him, no silencing him on social media. I just think it needs to be as public as possible. And then you throw everything you have at him intellectually, and hopefully that does the trick because he's not going away. And neither are his ideas. As long as you keep just trying to ignore them and toss them over to the side or pretend like he doesn't exist, the worse it's probably going to get, to be honest. And I do think that there are levels to this. I think it can be very hard because the political media atmosphere is oversaturated. Everybody has an opinion, and because of social media, everybody can propagate those opinions and ideas and beliefs as much as they want. And it's like sometimes there's just too much noise. Sometimes there is just too much noise. And I don't really know. I think it depends on the situation, but like, who are we going to just outright ban? What I'm saying here's the thing. Here's an example. Is this is what I talk about oversaturation. Here's what I mean. Is I used to try to engage more with TikTok debates, not necessarily get into the debate, but actually try and listen. I like to listen to debates on YouTube. And so I tried to listen to debates on TikTok to see if there was actually anything profitable that was going on there. And what would happen was as soon as the debate was reaching a point where it became interesting and the knowledge that was being shared was profitable, they would open up the debate to people in the chat or in the queue, and they would bring on some rando, right? Just like it's like in the middle of the conversation. Or instead of continuing on with a productive conversation with this individual, they just bring on this total rando, right? And it totally wrecked the momentum of the discussion. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I am a smart person. And I'm not going to sit here and make the claim, or by no means am I an S tier level debater. But you could tell immediately once they brought this rando on that they had nothing to offer. Even if they had an argument, they were incapable of having a conversation and articulate that argument in any profitable way, any productive way. And and you could tell, I could tell 5 seconds after this guy, it's like either A, this person had an IQ that they brought on of like 72 and it was just gibberish nonsense, or it's like Friday night and we're trying to have a discussion about feminism or abortions, and you get this guy on, it's Friday night, he's 7 beers deep, and you bring him on, he's like, "I hate women and women are stupid and blah, blah." I'm serious. Like that's kind of the tone that the discussion would take. That's the path that the discussion would take. And and they would let these morons ramble on and on and on. And you know why they did that? It's because whoever was running the debate, whoever was controlling everything, they would let on these idiots and let them ramble on and speak nonsense because it made them look like a genius. Because every time they brought on somebody who cannot function in a conversation and they have an opposing viewpoint, it just made them look like the smartest person on earth. So they would let all the idiots and all the morons just ramble on and on and on about whatever. They can barely even put together a coherent thought, and they would totally undermine the productive conversations. And so me, 5 seconds in, I'm like, "Get this guy out of here." And it's like, "Well, you're in favor of censorship. You're in favor of banning free speech." I'm like, how about let's try and have the most productive conversations possible, okay? Let's have the most productive conversations possible. And I don't think that you should. Am I in favor of just banning everybody and canceling everybody? No. Am I in favor of productive conversations? Yes. And so that means you don't have to let every single moron, every single idiot ramble on and on about their point of view. I'm sorry, like you just don't. And so there are levels to this. Like there's a balance to this. When everybody has a smartphone and everybody has an opinion, you kind of have to pick and choose your battles here. I don't have the time or mental energy to give every single person an equal amount of intellectual attention. It's just not possible, and it's not productive either because most people do not know what's going on. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I do or that I'm some kind of special person or I'm the only one that knows the truth. It's not like that. If you want to listen to me, great. If you don't, then that's okay. I understand. But I'm just saying that my gosh, is there a lot of people out there that think they have something to offer and they do not. They actually do not. And again, I think it's just about finding a balance. And and when you're talking about cancel culture, I just think people take it too far in principle. I think people take it way too far because eventually if you're dedicated to having productive conversations, then and you're really focused on getting this one person canceled, then you kind of just have to cancel everybody that they've ever interacted with. And pretty soon nobody can talk about anything ever in any real capacity. And that's really problematic. That's really problematic. And so I don't know. You're not just simply going to silence Nick Fuentes on social media. People will just follow him to whatever platform that will let him talk about whatever. The reason why Nick Fuentes continues to be relevant is because not enough people have gone out of their way to try and actually combat his views. It's more so as if that Nick Fuentes is such a polarizing figure that it's almost, and this is part of the reason why Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens received flack. It was almost like they thought it was a privilege to have him on their show. And so it was like, we're not going to push back against anything. We're just going to have a nice little, we're just going to have a nice little chat and we're going to align ourselves with him and all of these different things. And so it's like they view it as a privilege more so than like, okay, this guy's wrong about some things. Let's actually try and go after him for it, right? Let's actually try and combat his views. But I don't know. I don't know other than just publicly dismantling his ideas in the form of debate. I don't know how you fix the problem because I don't think silencing him is going to. NFL playoffs start tonight, and I am kind of just a passive fan. I think I said this last time I talked about football stuff. I have some favorites, but obviously the Colts, what a just a total meltdown on behalf of the Colts. I mean, it was embarrassing. I think they lost 7 or 8 games straight to finish out the season, and major props to Philip Rivers for hanging in there and playing a couple games. And they were competitive in those games. Like those games were competitive. They were kind of close. They could have won a couple of those games. But kudos to him for strapping on the pads again. I mean, that's kind of cool. And just to see somebody hungry for competition, it's this guy Philip Rivers could easily have stayed home and sat on the couch and did nothing, but no, he's still hungry for some competition, and I respect that. But Colts total meltdown. They're not in the playoffs, and I'm really rooting for. I don't know if I'm going to rank exactly who I want to win. I don't care about the Panther. The Panthers are probably the worst team in the playoffs. I don't really care if they win. It would be kind of interesting if they beat the Rams. I don't see them being a competitor truly. I don't know. I don't think the Packers are good enough. I don't think the Bears. I don't really want to see the Bears win, to be honest. I would definitely have a number of different teams ahead of them. I'm really rooting for the Seahawks, mostly because of Sam Darnold. I think that Sam Darnold has gotten a lot of flack and he's gotten a lot of criticism. First of all, in New York, the New York Jets are just a total mess. And so it's kind of hard to blame him when you have an organization and coaching staff that is that dysfunctional. And then he goes everywhere else he goes, he plays well. You can't really, I don't know how much of that you can really pin on him in terms of his own performance, but goes to Minnesota, plays really well for most of the season. Goes to Seattle, and he's played the last half of the season hasn't been as good, but he's played well enough to win, well enough to be the 1 seed in the NFC. And so I think a lot of people have hated on him since he was at the Jets, and then he kind of fell apart there towards the last the last couple games of the seasons last year with Minnesota, and they let him go, and so he's received a lot of flack. I just want to see him succeed. I would love to see him win. I think that it would be really cool if Sam Darnold won the Super Bowl. The only other player or other storyline that I care about more than that is probably seeing the Bills win, and more specifically, Josh Allen. I would love to see Josh Allen win a Super Bowl. I don't know if they can, but there is something to be said about the fact that none of the other quarterbacks, any of the other quarterbacks in the AFC that you would maybe possibly put ahead of him or equal to him, they're not in. They're not in the playoffs. So Lamar, Patrick Mahomes, and Joe Burrow, none of those guys are in the playoffs. Josh Allen, other than Aaron Rodgers, is definitively the most experienced quarterback in the AFC playoffs right now. And so, if do we ever think this is going to happen again? Do we ever think that this is going to happen where he never has to play any of those guys that I mentioned before in the playoffs? Probably not. Like the chances of Burrow, Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson missing the playoffs from here on out, all in the same year, are slim to none. I mean, it's not going to happen. It's most likely not going to happen again. And so he really has to capitalize. He really has to capitalize. And if he doesn't get it done now, I don't really know when he would get it done. And I think that a lot of people have created this rivalry between Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. Josh Allen seems to be the dominant quarterback in the regular season because the Bills usually beat the Chiefs in the regular season, it seems like, and then the Chiefs always beat them in the postseason when it matters most. And it's like, well, it's a real rivalry. I don't know if it can be a real rivalry when one guy has 5 Super Bowl appearances and 3 rings, and the other guy has 0 Super Bowl appearances and 0 rings. So it's not even really equal at this point. They might be close in talent and relevance and in terms of value to their team, but in terms of accomplishments, it's not even really close. So if Josh Allen was able to win a Super Bowl this year and at least have one, it's kind of like the Brady Manning thing. It's like Tom Brady won a couple Super Bowls. It took Peyton Manning a while to get over the hump, but it was like the Super Bowl in 2006 when the Colts won. It was like it validated not Tom Brady's, Peyton Manning's entire career. It's like, okay, now all the things that people have been saying about Peyton Manning, they must be true. Now he's kind of solidified himself as an all-time great quarterback because he finally has the rings or the ring on top of the MVPs and his individual success in the regular season. And so I think that Josh Allen really needs that. I think it would be interesting for the NFL if Josh Allen won a Super Bowl just to make the rivalry to actually make it a rivalry. So now if the Bills win, if Josh Allen wins, they can go every year saying these guys are both Super Bowl champions. They both have a lot to offer. They're both chasing the the top quarterbacks of all time, and they're going into the playoffs next year, both with a ring and still something to prove, right? And so I think that would be cool. Otherwise, it's just kind of it's honestly just kind of whatever for me. Um, I mean, if the Patriots, it would be crazy if the Patriots won again. And I know it's been a little while since that kind of fell apart with Belichick and Brady. But if they come back just a few years later, what has it been 5, 6, 7 years, and are winning Super Bowls again, that would be a real kick in the butt to the rest of us who get tired of seeing them win. Broncos, I'm kind of neutral on. I rooted for the Broncos when Peyton Manning was there, and so if they won, I guess that would be okay. Jacksonville, I don't really care. I don't see them winning the Super Bowl. They've been playing really well. I actually kind of low key like the Texans. I know they're in the same division of the Colts, which sucks, but I like CJ Stroud, played for Ohio State fan, and I feel like he's been kind of up and down. I think a good playoff run would help kind of restabilize people's view of him as a good quarterback in the NFL. I don't really hate the Rams, and I don't hate Sean McVay or Matthew Stafford or anything, but they've already won and they're getting kind of old. And I think this might be like the last this might be the last hurrah with Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford together. I'm trying to think who else is in. I feel like I'm missing a couple. NFC teams: Seahawks, Packers, Rams, 49ers. 49ers, I think, are kinda just I don't think that they can go on the road 3 times in a row and win win the Super Bowl. I like Brock Purdy. I love Christian McCaffrey, and I really felt like between Jimmy Garoppolo in the Super Bowl and then Brock Purdy in the Super Bowl, I felt like they should have won at least one of those. They really you can make an argument that they should have won both of those. They should have won. They were in those games. They were competitive in those games. And you could easily make an argument, I feel like, that they should have won both of those Super Bowls, but they didn't, unfortunately. And I guess you have the Eagles too. Now, I'm actually an Eagles fan. I'm a Jalen Hurts fan. Jalen Hurts gets a lot of flack because he's so up and down. But I I actually appreciate the fact that he just seems like a baller. He just seems like an adult. And I hear people who talk about NFL football, they talk about, well, there's something going on. There's dysfunction between him and the wide receivers because he's just so sober and he he just cares about winning. If he throws for 115 yards and they win the Super Bowl, he does not care. He does not care. And I respect that. He just cares about when he doesn't matter. If he has to run for 150 yards and throw for 75 yards, he will do whatever it takes to win. And so I respect that. I wouldn't mind seeing the Eagles win again because then it makes the conversation between the Eagles. I think you have a real rivalry between the Eagles and the Chiefs now because then the Eagles would have two and the Chiefs would have three and they would have faced each other in Super Bowl and Philadelphia totally just dismantled them last year. And so I wouldn't mind seeing that. One of the coolest stories was the first time the Eagles went to the Super Bowl and they lost. There was I read a story that Jalen Hurts had a picture on his cell phone, his screensaver. It was of him walking off the field after their Super Bowl loss, and he kept that as his screensaver as a reminder. It's like, hey, you came up a little bit short. And then the next year, I think it was the next year. I think it was the Chiefs. Maybe there was a 1 year gap. Yeah, I think there was a 1 year gap. So like two times within the span of 3 years, you had the Eagles and the Chiefs playing each other. And then when you got to the second matchup in the second time they made the Super Bowl together, it was like third quarter, late third quarter, and the Eagles were just blowing the Chiefs out. And you look over, they pan over to the Philadelphia Eagles sideline, and you just see Jalen Hurts standing there like this, just totally deadpan, shark eyes, complete focus. It didn't matter. They were up by like 25 plus points or something like that. And he was still just laser focused in. And so I respect him as a competitor. If he won again, I think that that would be really cool. So I guess I would say probably Bills number one, Seahawks number two, Eagles number three in terms of who I want to see win the Super Bowl this year.